Hey there, hope you're doing well. I had several ideas come to mind that I want to discuss. First, I'll preface you'll notice with a lot of these videos, I make references to other people's discoveries or where I got certain information from. There are many spiritualist people who usurp from others and they do not mention where they got these things from, which can be a bit sleazy. Sometimes it might be just forgetfulness, but if it's consistently so that a person wants to seem more powerful than others and they're getting their information from elsewhere and they never reveal that, you can kind of see that if you know to look for it. So I got this piece of information from watching a David Lynch video. He talks about meditation. This subject matter is about how art generally is not created from a place of pain. It might be about pain, but when the artist is actually making something in creation mode, they are in a very balanced place, or they're excited, or maybe they've had synchronicities, something that's a driving force for them to enjoy the work. They're in a comfortable place, so much so that they can actually examine uncomfortable things like pain. Or another way of saying it is, what was painful at one point, in understanding what it was all about, a person can guide the unbalanced emotion to a place where it truly wants to go and maybe even belongs. This is what I think good art does. It's not so much that pain or something that really would hit the core of us so deeply or made us hurt or whatever. It's not that. It's just when something rings true so deeply, it can remind us of why those things even happened, or maybe the rewards a person might get for going through that, even though no one should have to go through that, right? So I have noticed in our art that we seem to think that Golden Age can't really happen. I have this sort of suspicion that the idea of utopia has been placed upon this world as if we aren't the ones, we don't want a perfect world. I strongly suspect that that sort of brainwashing or programming is by people who are trying to control us. That when people mess up the prospect of abundance or a golden age happening, it's really the projections placed on them, the expectations, the fears that were put on them that stops them from doing that. And when a person fails at creating golden age or whatever they're trying to do, maybe art, they might be taunted saying, see, you can't trust yourself, but it's really the projections that you couldn't trust, not your core self. I hope this is making sense. I've talked about this before in other videos. So each video is kind of, it's unfolding a more and more deeper subjects. So the more further back you could go with my videos, the more a lot of the things I say are going to make sense, because these are all essentially sequels. You can watch sequels out of order, of course. So that's what I'm kind of trying to share with you. I'm trying to dispel the idea that pain is necessary for art, and that we don't go through pain and toiling to learn something, like it's a deep lesson, like we had to suffer pain to experience the lesson. It can incidentally occur when we observe the Anima Mundi, and I talked about the Anima Mundi in 3 videos prior to this, which is sort of trying to see the animated in the mundane, or the liveliness even in situations where it seems like there isn't liveliness. I think that's what's going on when we have sort of these euphoric experiences in works of art that are about a character going through like tormented experiences, maybe one after the other. And we even find in our own lives that while we ourselves are sort of a spirited individual, We may run across others who are trying to use our spirit for their own advantages. But that doesn't change the fact that we aren't doing those spirited actions for their benefit. We're doing it because we want to build them into something like a golden age or a work of art or a connection with a fellow potential lover or a connection with a soul friend or maybe our favorite pet who chose us and now they are with us forever until they die. So I thought this was important to share because I've noticed that most of us think the truth always has to be brutal in some way, or that we can't create a paradise, or whatever. But the reason what made me suspicious about this is if you look at most movies and most art, most music, it's about a lot of people talking about their problems and vulnerability and failures. And I had to ask myself, is this really the best we can do with our lives? Is just process torture and pain? Like, so I've imagined science fiction scenarios that if we can surely dream about the apocalypse, a post-apocalyptic world, people feel a lot of comfort in those extreme scenarios amplified of what's already happening now, because they feel like, oh, someone gets me and understands what I'm going through. It's not that we want that in our lives. But what I've also noticed is that most movies about love are not about love at all. I've mentioned this in another video. And that when you fall in love with someone, that surely that's an interesting story. And it doesn't have to be the cliches of romantic comedies. Like, I don't like romantic comedies. Generally, they aren't funny, and they're not about love. If anything, anytime comedy is kind of laughing at sort of our worst parts of ourselves and saying it's funny, it's because it's true, I'm like, we should be kind of ashamed of ourselves about that. Not laughing because it's funny, it's true that humans are predictable. I don't find that funny, you know. I find it funny when it highlights the absurdities of our unexpected results, you know. Sure. A comedy that I refer to sometimes, that romantic comedy that actually is kind of good, is Amelie. Because it's all about sort of artists, an artistic quality of seeing the world from a lens that no one else does, and caring about particular details about the world that no one else does, and even being kind of afraid of the world because they're used to kind of like shrinking those little details. That movie is really about those kind of details, but it also just doesn't have a whole lot of interaction between the love interests. Most movies don't have the interaction about love interests, what it's like to be on a date that's like magical, you know. Then I remember there was like reality television shows there were like dating shows that would put these potential daters in these fantastical scenarios like a cruise ship or a vacation, and people envision that to be what love is like, when it's really not, because you're taking a person out of their normal element so that they are not going to behave as themselves. But you're putting a sort of unsustainable scenario that's rarely going to ever happen again, and kind of creating an infatuation rather than truly learning about a person's peculiarities and how they see the world unusual. So in the other videos, when I talked about the anima mundi, which is the soul of the world, the animated mundane, a characteristic in seeing the world in such a way where you understand it so that you can actually create art from it. I think that's very similar to how to fall in love with people. And if we can learn how to fall in love with people by becoming artists and falling in love with other artists, then surely we can create art that resembles something that isn't utopia and that is more like a golden age and is not us always romanticizing the brighter side of our problems or our pain. And I find that art valuable. Don't get me wrong. I was a big fan of a lot of depressing music. I have a huge film collection, about 500, 600 films, and a lot of the realizations I'm sharing with you now is now that I have this huge collection where I kept like trying to find the most like philosophical or dense stuff out there, I realized what hasn't been spoken of or shown enough of, Well, so yeah, I guess this is my video about what I would like to do with our art, how to kind of see pain. I do think it's wonderful when you merge your pain also with the dream that you want to create, right? Because you're giving it a bridge. Something like energy was rejected and made you feel maybe alienated, or who you were wasn't understood, and the intended results you wanted to achieve. Then you bring it to your creative world, work of art, and you show what you really wanted. Like, I think that's brilliant. That's some beautiful works of art that I think that is going to be the bridge to people seeing how Golden Age can truly happen, and it's not just utopia. And I've been concerning myself with how to do this with my own art for some time now. I can't tell you I've come up with like a perfect way of doing it, but I'm definitely heading in that direction. Let me know what you all think of this, if you've thought about subjects like this before, or if you've worked on art like this before. I'd be happy to read about it, and or even just leave any comment that you want to. Anyway, much love. I hope you all do very well and enjoy this evening or day or whenever you receive this.